Sorry, the videos are going to have a lot of glare. I have tried 50 different angles while we were starting with class, trying to find an angle that both gets rid of the glare but doesn't make it so obnoxious to look at. So it's like,
you want to turn off the lights?
we could try turning off those backlights. See if that bothers you guys too much. Is anyone bothered by that?
No.
That will help some of it. That will help the top.
It did help.
So, all right, we'll just do class in the dark. As the sun sets, well, we'll see what happens. Anyways, so quick recap for last time. Let's start with a quick recap, and then feel free to jump in with any questions along the way in case we touch upon something that you want a reminder on. So we started out with a kind of definition of philosophy. We went over the basic fields that we have in philosophy. We went over the fact that it actually means the love of wisdom, and how the notion of what philosophy is has evolved over time. Early on, if you were in any field of study, we called it philosophy. And now in more modern times, it's splitting off into very particular subjects. Important to note is that the three main branches of philosophy, do we remember what those were? Metaphysics.
One that starts with E.
Epistemology.
Aesthetics.
Aesthetics is a sub-branch of it. The third one, axology.
Oh,
And the major branches in there are aesthetics, politics, and ethics. Perfect. And then we did a quick crash course of world history, trying to hurry up and set up Thales. So we went over Egypt. Important note, in Egypt is very stable, and they have a priest class there that's been empirically just gathering data for an extended period of time. So once our early philosophers get to Egypt, they have access to a lot of data that they can start speculating about. We talked about the Assyrians finally bringing Mesopotamia together, then the Medes and Babylon came along. Babylon, even though the country doesn't, the nation, the empire, the Babylonian Empire doesn't necessarily stay steady once it comes along, the city itself and the area around the city is relatively steady. So you have, in Babylon, something similar happening to Egypt. Egypt, they're more interested in geometry. In Babylon, they're interested more in the stars and arithmetic. And at one point, I made a few mistakes last week, but one that bugged me so bad, I need to correct it now. For some reason, I said Babylon used a base 12 counting system. I have no clue why I said that. They used a base 60 system, which is why we have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes, and it's why we have 60s all over the place in our units. That's because it's fallout from Babylon. And the reason they used base 60 is because it's a very divisible number. It's divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 10. If you look at, so 7 of the first 10 digits is divisible by, so you can do arithmetic with 60 very easily. Same way that's easy for you to divide by 10 in your head with the base 10 system, or for you to divide by 5, or for you to divide by 2. The reason that's so easy for you to do is because 10 is divisible by those numbers. Well, they thought in terms of 60s, and so they could do division by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 in their head really quick, the same way that you can with 5 and 2.
That's smart.
Yeah, it was a very practical system. Makes that you can do arithmetic relatively easy. Okay, so that was big with the Babylonians. And then remember that the time that we're at is when Persia's on the rise. So the Median Empire is being overthrown by the Persian Empire. They're on the rise, and during the lifetime of the first few philosophers that we talk about, they're going to be conquered in Lydia, that place in Asia Minor. You remember that? Where basically all our philosophers are. So we're talking about the city Miletus right now. That city gets conquered by the Persians. And then we went back in Greek history. We talked about the early Minoans, and then how the Mycenaeans came along. The Minoans were on the island of Crete. The Mycenaeans were the ones that conquered, and then the Dorians invade, which is where Sparta is ultimately from, descendants of the Dorians. And remember, Sparta is important when we're talking about the Greeks, because if you were to ask early Greeks what's the best city-state, they'd unanimously say Sparta, by far. What kind of question is that? It's obvious. So the culture of Sparta is very relevant for how a lot of philosophers create their ideas, and we'll also see that in Plato.
I'm curious if that's a typo on Minoans, or is that how it's actually spelled?
Dorians.
Minoans.
Minoans. Yeah, that might be a typo.
It's probably not correct. I figured, but
Yep, I think you're right. It should be the Minoans. Yeah, that looks weird now that I'm staring at it. All right, and then we finally got to our first philosopher, Thales. Thales from Miletus. We'll jump to the next screens. I had a map to remind us where we're at as we talk about Thales. So we're over in Miletus, that's a city down here at the coast, right on the edge of Lydia. This is where he was from. And what was his big contribution? We knew that he was a great mathematician, okay. We know that he is the first scientist. What's his contribution to philosophy? What's the wonderful question that he asked that kickstarts philosophy?
What is the one thing that all matter is made of?
Right. Why does he assume that there must be one thing underlying everything?
Because things change form all the time.
Wonderful. He's looking for what is behind change. You watch what's the one we used last time? A cow eating grass turns to milk. How on earth does grass turn to milk unless they're somehow really the same stuff? Unless there was already that milk stuff somehow in the grass and there's still that grass stuff somehow in the milk. So he thought there's got to be this one underlying stuff that makes up everything. Now his answer to the question isn't that great. What was his answer?
Water.
Water. Why did he think water? Well, we see it a lot with biological life. That's one of the reasons we thought water. Water's one of the only substances that they knew that you could see it in a liquid, solid, and gaseous state. You can see water freeze to ice. You can see it turn to steam. It seems like water turns to air, right? You spill a little bit of water on a rock and watch it for a second, and the water slowly disappears, and what's left? Just air. So water must be able to turn into air. You dig into the ground deep enough, and suddenly there's water. Does that mean if dirt gets really, really compressed under a bunch of weight of dirt, it turns to water? So he thought water for some good reasons, but by modern standards, that's kind of a ridiculous answer. So the answer not that great, but the question is the wonderful question that kicks off philosophy. What is the one stuff? What's the stuff underlying everything? And he said water. That is super cricket, isn't it? Is that going to drive you guys crazy? I heard one person say a little bit.
I think we can fix it. You just change the keystone.
Oh, what the? That is amazing.
That might help the bear too. You can put the projector at an angle and then.
Yeah, I'll play with that next time. Good to know that's a feature. Maybe we can get rid of the glare next week. Okay. So that was Thales. Now, Anaximander, he's going to be from Melita. So our first three are all going to be from Melita. They're on that coast. And remember, they're still all Greeks, even though they're not in mainland Greece. And remember that Persian Empire, they're about to rise and conquer
What's
Lydia.
this dark blue?
The
That's Greece.
dark blue are the Greeks. Remember, Greece, this peninsula, is very mountainous, and so what happened as cities developed, you basically had, your city had to be in a valley between two mountains. And there's not a lot of space in that little valley to provide food for the city. So before you know it, your city naturally on this peninsula is going to be pretty close to the coast. But before you know it, you can't in your little valley grow enough food to support your population. And so the Greeks would build these colonies, so they spread out very quickly. So that's why even though Greece is right here, all this blue are the Greeks, and they're spread out all over the place, growing their food at other sources. And then now they have a massive trade network, which was another thing that contributed to Greece having so much information.
So maybe you talked about this last time, but is there any ethnic connection between the Lydians and the Greeks, or what's the connection between Lydia and Greece?
No. So Lydia were the peoples here. The Greeks just came and settled along here. So they're a different ethnicity. They'd have a mixed ethnicity because remember how the Greeks colonized.
Yeah.
You take 500 men, you send them off, they go find a small town, they kill all the men there and mate with the women. So there's going to be that connection.
So what changes in the philosophy when Lydia is conquered by the Persian Empire?
Nothing changes in the philosophy. We're just going to see side effect in philosophers' lives that are a consequence of Persia conquering.
Does Persia conquer all the way to the coast, or just?
Yes, all the way to the coast. So early with Lydia, these city-states, not city-states, they're just cities, they have a lot of autonomy. And the deal is internally they can manage their affairs however they want, as long as they support Lydia in any foreign affairs. So basically contribute soldiers to war when Lydia is at war with people, but for the most part internally, you can do whatever you want to do. When Cyrus the Great comes to conquer Lydia, he asks these Ionian cities here to help him fight Lydia. They refuse. They're allied with Lydia. So Cyrus, he ends up conquering Lydia. And then so these city-states then offer him the same terms. They say, okay, we'll create the same contract with you that we had with Lydia. He says, no, that's not going to fly. You didn't support me, so now you're going to deal with the consequences. And so what ends up happening is they install tyrants in a lot of these cities to manage the cities. Persia does. Because these Greeks are impossible to manage politically. It's not like when you go and conquer Egypt, where everyone just listens to the pharaoh. So if you get the pharaoh to listen to you, all of Egypt falls in line. When you conquer this city-state, they could care less about what this other city over here thinks, or what this one thinks, or this one thinks. So conquering one city no way helps you with the next city again. And there's no management overall for all of them. And so the Greeks were notoriously difficult to govern. And so the way that the Persians ended up doing it is installing tyrants in every single city to manage the city, which obviously the populations of the city don't like. So there's just conflict the entire time from that point onwards. And so we'll see how that falls out. It has huge ramifications as time goes on. I mean, that's what ultimately leads up to the Greco-Persian Wars. Okay, do we have any more questions before we get to the next philosopher? Go ahead.
What year was it that the Persians took over Lydia?
They conquered 547. So in 3 years. Now we'll notice that that's going to happen at the end of the lives of the first three philosophers that we talked about. But once we get to Xenophon, the fourth one, he actually leaves because the Persians conquer. So he's going to be from a town close to Miletus. It's up here, Colophon or something like that. And well, we'll see when we get to him. Any other questions before we go to the next philosopher? Go ahead.
So the Persians went and conquered like all through that top right corner into the.
All of Lydia.
Yeah, did they go to the top?
Yep, they conquered Thrace, they conquered the Macedonians, and they conquered to right up right here.
And that is where.
And that's when the Greco-Persian Wars kick off.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Who was their emperor?
It was Cyrus the Great early on. I think they reached their max under Darius. Darius is in Darius right before Xerxes. I don't know if that's Darius the first or Darius the second. But yeah, they get absolutely massive. I mean, we still have that map for how big they get. That's Persia at its height, and so you see the Greek peninsula right there is what's left. But here's Lydia, and they got all that. They've got all of Egypt down here. Let's see, under Darius the first, so that's when they reach their height, which it's under Darius the first that the Greco-Persian Wars kick off around 500 BC.
That's massive.
Yeah, absolutely massive empire. Oh, I didn't do the feedback slide. I was straight on the recap. So before we jumped into that, I actually wanted really quick feedback on the class as we go through the class. So reading the paper, that was a bad idea probably for how long it was. So what I want to do is make so that you guys can present the material however you want. You don't have to read the paper. If it's a smaller paper, go ahead and read it. If it's a bigger paper, maybe we have a summary, or you can present however you want. If you want to do a slideshow, poster, I don't care. Just present the material somehow. And then Peter mentioned that he wants me to go over the material for Heraclitus before he gives his presentation on Heraclitus. Last time they read their paper on Thales and I presented. Maybe it would have been better if I went over Thales first and then you made connections with what they were saying as they were talking. I don't know. Feedback? Any opinions?
I'd let the presenter choose.
I think it would
Just let the presenter choose?
Yeah.
Okay. Don't require the paper. Yeah, allow the students to do whatever they want. I don't know if you guys want me to formally open up an unanswered question to you guys. You guys can always give your responses and answers however you want. But I know that's kind of weird. You don't always feel comfortable like, okay, he says I can always ask a question, but is it okay for me to just ask a question right now? What I thought maybe we do is if someone asks me a question and I don't have a good answer for it, then we'll just formally open it up to all of you guys and let you respond. I mean, that would have always been okay, but maybe formally doing it makes you feel more comfortable giving your 2 cents. So if you like that idea, next time there's an unanswered question, say, remember you were going to open it up, because I'll forget. Show outline. I'm so glad I put that on there. Let me give you guys a sense of how this is going so that those of you doing presentations ahead can get a feel for where it's going to come in. So we did a logic overview, early history, covered Greece. So right now we're covering the Ionians. So we did Thales already. I think we're going to cover these 4 tonight: Anaximander, Anaximenes, Xenophon, and Heraclitus. Next we're going to do the Italians. So that's going to be Pythagoras, Parmenides, Zeno, and Melissus. I think we'll do these 4 next week. That's my guess. Then we'll do the Greco-Persian Wars. Oh no, who's on that paper? And then we'll do Empedocles and Anaxagoras, and the Adamus, and the Sophist. I did all those. And the Sophist, and then we'll jump to the Peloponnesian Wars for whoever's on those. And then let's see, classic period, then we'll do Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the big three. I'm not sure where I'm going to do Euclid's Elements yet. I'll either do it after Alexander the Great or before, but the last four that I have written out so far in the outline is we'll do Euclid's Elements, Alexander the Great, Rise of Rome, Punic Wars. These three are in the right order. I just don't know if I'll do Euclid's Elements after Alexander the Great or before.
And that's all in 1 week?
No, I have no clue how that's going to break down.
Oh.
I'm completely guessing that we'll get through 4 today and 4 next week. Complete guess. So that, hopefully, for those of you with upcoming presentations, gives you an idea of where to expect it. For the most part, I'm just following the exact outline that the author uses in the book. So you should be able to get most of it there. Was there any other feedback from last week? Any ideas you had? Anything you want changed? Anything? Like, don't like? Okay.
Covered it.
Go ahead.
I think we covered it.
I think you covered it. Okay. So now we're on to Anaximander. Anaximander, he is going to be a pupil of Thales. Now, when we say that one philosopher is a pupil or the student of another philosopher, it's not always necessarily a student-teacher relationship. It's just that they happen to be two people who live together. It could be just two people that happen to live in the same city. One of them's older than the other one, and the younger really liked the older's ideas, picked up on him, and explained it and expanded upon him himself, or something like that. It could be formally taught, as in Aristotle was formally taught by Plato. But then when we look at Plato's education by Socrates, it's really, he just happened to be around for some conversations that went on. And we say that he was a student of him. I mean, Socrates dies when Plato's 20, so he's just a young buck that happened to follow him around and hear some of what he had to say, and yet we still call him a student. So we don't know exactly what the relationship was for these early philosophers between what we call the student and teacher, so just keep that in mind. And I'm just going to use that loose language and say that he was a student of Thales. Good? Mm-hmm. All right, so he's a student of Thales from the exact same city, Miletus. Astronomer, cartographer, and a philosopher. He's the first of the known Greeks to publish a written document on nature. So Thales, he said everything he said, but for all we know, he did not have an actual work. We do know that Anaximander actually wrote a work down. We call the work On Nature. It's a common thing for pre-Socratic philosophers that talk about nature to have a work attributed to them called On Nature. We don't know if that was its actual name. It's just what we call it now. So we'll see On Nature come up a lot for things written by these early philosophers.
So when you say it was published, do you mean like...
He had an actual book.
Were there copies?
There were copies that you could get if you lived at the time.
So you could go buy one of his copies
Yeah.
at the time?
It would have been a handwritten copy, but yeah, you could have found a copy of his works. Okay, so some of his big ideas. He thought that the earth is a cylinder that floats free without falling and does not rest upon anything. So this is a huge breakthrough in thought, this idea that the earth isn't resting on anything. Why does it have to be resting on anything? Why can't it just be there? Why is it that if it's not on anything, it's going to fall? What makes it fall as opposed to go up? So he thought the earth is actually just resting there. It's not on anything. So that was a big idea. Now, he thought it was a cylinder, which isn't as inspired, and he thought that we lived on the top of the cylinder, not on one of the sides. You all know what shape a cylinder is, right? Circle on the top, circle on the bottom.
What did you imagine was on the sides?
I don't know if he thought water was there or if it was just earth. We just know what he thought about the top. So he actually created a map, and here's what he thought the earth actually looked like, a map of the earth. Now, you can see it's an absolutely terrible map, but you can see where he does a good job is around the Mediterranean. There's Greece, there's Italy. He does a pretty good job with the Mediterranean, does an okay job with the Black Sea. But then there's just Europe, Asia, and Libya. Libya's Africa. This right here is the Nile River that he put in. So, not a great map, but relative to the times, you can definitely tell that they had pretty good understanding of what's going on around the Mediterranean Sea. Outside of that, they don't really know what's going on. Which makes sense when we saw the blue on that previous map. That shows where the Greeks are. So those were the areas he knew about. Go ahead.
Does he ever give an argument of how he came up to the idea of the earth resting on nothing?
We don't, a lot of these, we don't know their formal arguments for their positions. Remember that the majority of fragments we have for these early people, the majority of writing is other people's commentary. So we don't have his works, and we might not have, well, say it this way, we don't have his works, but it just so happened that Aristotle, when he wrote his Metaphysics, commented on some of his work because Aristotle had access to him at the time. And so he's just being critical of some of their ideas, so then we go and get Aristotle and says, oh, well, Aristotle says that he must have said this, so he must have said this. That's how it goes along the time.
That's how a lot of what I wrote about Phillies was.
Yeah, that is, for these early philosophers, you might remember I told you last week, if you want to get the source that most people use for a lot of these guys, just read the first few chapters of Aristotle's Metaphysics.
So we know that Anaximander published a document on nature. Do we have that, or is
No.
it lost?
We do not have that. It does not extant. But he actually wrote one. That much we know, because it's referenced by early philosophers. He was very interested in the origins of things, in particularly the origins of people. He thought people couldn't have always been because infants are so helpless. There's no way that an infant could have ever survived in the wild. So humans couldn't have always been on the earth. And so he had a very crude version of evolution and thought man came from fish, ultimately. And published a map of the world, and also a map of the cosmos. Map of the cosmos. I'm not sure how to make sense of the fact that the stars are between the moon and the sun. Seems like it would be pretty easy to correct that, but nonetheless, had a map of the cosmos. What's that?
It would be easy to correct because when the moon passes over the stars don't disappear.
Right, so I'm not sure how to make sense out of that one, but it is what it is. Okay, some more of his pretty spectacular breakthroughs. Claimed the sun is pure fire and larger than the earth. Now, a lot of his contemporaries thought that the sun was about the size of the Peloponnesus, which is that second peninsula hooked off of Greece where Sparta is. So they thought it was very, very tiny. He says, no, it's actually much bigger than the earth. I think he gives something like 27 times bigger or something like that. Terrible approximation, but much better than what everyone else was saying at the time. And he claimed that it was pure fire. So this isn't some god in a chariot riding across the sky or anything like that. He thought it was pure fire. Now, that's not great based off of modern standards, but based off of your day-to-day experience out of the things you see around you, there's no better way to say it than, yeah, it's a big ball of fire. That's close enough. So not a bad classification. And he also thought that the moon shines by reflecting the sun's light. So the moon also isn't this god, but it's actually just reflecting the sun. So the sun is a big ball of fire, and the moon just reflects that light. The moon is in its own ball of fire, shining somehow, just more dimly. So pretty good breakthroughs there. Also claimed that water vapor condenses into clouds, which then produces rain. So he had a basic understanding of, what do we call the cycle now? You all said it, and I missed it, but it sounds like you all know it.
It's the water cycle.
Do they just call it the precipitation cycle?
No, it's the water cycle.
The water cycle, is that what they call it? I thought if I heard the name I'd recognize it, but that's not triggering a memory. I'll believe you though. So the water cycle. So he understood the water cycle. Water evaporates, rises up into clouds, condenses, and rains. And then he's supposed to have built a sundial, or at least a way of measuring the seasons. Some people argue that he lives too early to have actually produced a sundial. Seems like those come later. But he erected something in Sparta which kept track of something. Some people say, no, it was a sundial. Other people say, no, it was something that just helps measure the seasons. But
This is about 550.
measuring time. Anaximander, 610 to 546. So you see it's going to be just at the end of his life where Persia makes her invasion. So it doesn't have much of a huge impact on him. But he's growing up in the city-state which is under the authority of Lydia. And so it's pretty autonomous and they can do what they want. Say that again?
He's only 36.
Only 36.
Oh, sorry.
64.
I see
What
510.
are you seeing?
I see 510.
Oh, no.
546. I thought that was 546.
This is born, this is death.
Yeah.
All right, so how long did he live?
64 years.
64 years. You see that math?
Yeah.
Okay. Because the years are counting up right now, not, well, I guess counting down because that's the way I should say it. Okay. Let's see. And the fact that he erected something in Sparta tells you that he was also well traveled. Remember, Miletus is a coastal city, a lot of trade going on, and so it's still relatively easy for people that live there to travel the world, which he was obviously able to do. Okay, now he's also a material monist. Monist, that means one. Everything's composed of one thing, and that one thing is a material thing. It's something physical. Now, he claimed that the fundamental substance couldn't be water. Otherwise, water would have overtaken all the other elements. Water by itself seems pretty stable. If everything's made out of water, everything would eventually deteriorate back to water, and eventually we just have water in the universe, and everything would be water. So remember that they think that the universe is eternal, so he thinks everything would have eventually been water. So he didn't like water as the answer to the question. And so his answer to what the one stuff is, the fundamental stuff, is what he calls a pyrrhon. So thought that the principal element was a pyrrhon. Now this is a weird word in Greek, which there's a couple ways that we can define it. And these different definitions are very important because they're going to help us realize Greek confusion with infinity. We're going to see as we go on that the Greeks talk a lot about infinity and they get confused by infinity, and it's because they mix up these three ideas all as infinity. So his word is apeiron, and we can translate that as the indefinite, the infinite, or the boundless. Now notice that those are three different words, and we're going to notice as the Greeks talk about infinity, they kind of confuse all three of these together. If something's infinite, then somehow it can't be bounded, and somehow it's indefinite. So he talks about it, his one stuff he calls apeiron, and it's this indefinite, infinite, boundless material. Boundless as in it has no definite boundaries around it. So it's like shapeless almost. Not bounded, those of you who took calculus, not bounded from above or below, not that kind of bounded. Boundless as in no boundary, no definite boundary. Kind of like an open set topology. Okay. So yeah, he thought it was apeiron, and then he claimed nature is ruled by laws just like human society, and anything that disturbs the balance of nature does not last long. So in his mind, well, maybe we'll come here and then I'll do some more explanation. The four elements then, which he calls fire, air, water, earth, each seek to enlarge their quantity, thereby maintaining balance. Okay, so he thought apeiron is the one stuff, and that somehow you can transform apeiron into earth, apeiron into water, apeiron into air. Remember, you can't have any physical contact with apeiron. There's no way for you to talk about it. It's some indefinite material. It's just everywhere, this infinite, undefinite material. But once it becomes definite, it's going to be one of the elements. It's going to be earth, it's going to be water, it's going to be fire, it's going to be air. And so since they're all backed by this indefinite apeiron, then they can transform between each other. And so there's nothing weird about water turning into air because they're both backed by apeiron. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Now, he has this view of the universe along the lines of fire creates more fire, earth creates more earth, water creates more water, and air creates more air. Not sure how to make perfect sense of that, but so he views the four elements each as trying to cause more stuff in the universe to be like them. So earth is trying to create more things like earth. Fire is the one that makes more sense. Fire grows, fire expands more. So when you have a fire, it grows into more fire. It's trying to make fire bigger. So he views these four elements as kind of in conflict with each other, each trying to make the universe more of their particular element, and thereby maintaining balance in the universe. Now, this is a balance by this cosmic justice, ensuring that no one becomes too big or too small. He's still personifying this justice a little bit. It's kind of a human-like justice that governs over each thing and makes sure one doesn't get too big or too small. But they're all trying to grow and get bigger and smaller. He's still personifying them, the same way that a kingdom wants to grow bigger. If you have two kingdoms next to each other, both trying to grow bigger, there's going to be a sort of equilibrium between them where they're stable. He's kind of personifying the elements in a similar way. So they're trying to all grow, make more of themselves, but there's this cosmic justice making sure they don't get out of hand. They're able to change into each other because ultimately they're all just apeiron. And apeiron can take on the shape of fire. It can be definite as fire, it can be definite as air, it can be definite as earth, it can be definite as water. But if it's not any of those, then it's indefinite, and so you can't have any physical experience with it. To give a real crude intuition for this apeiron, we can kind of think about it the way that we might think about energy now. If you know E equals mc squared, and you know you can somehow turn energy into matter and matter to energy. It's like we can have matter of one form, convert that to energy, and then back to matter of another form. And so the apeiron is like that energy where it's not a definite element on our periodic table, but it helps us transfer from one to the other. It's not a great analogy, but I think it might help. Okay. So some early commenter commenting on Anaximander. This is probably coming from Aristotle. If the principal element is neither water nor any other of the so-called elements, meaning the four elements, earth, fire, water, air, but some different boundless nature, from which all the heavens arise and the world within them, out of those things whence is the generation for existing things, into these again does their destruction come to be, according to necessity. So necessity here is the governing power that's making sure that these things are happening. And notice that he very much thinks that whatever it's generated from, it eventually destructs, it has its destruction back into that thing again, which is why he was so opposed to water. So if everything comes from water, it's eventually going to have its destruction back into water until there'd be water everywhere, which was his problem with water. For they make amends and give reparations to one another for their offenses according to the disposition of time. So, it's going to be very poetical language until we get to Aristotle. Not so much with Plato, but still it's a dialogue, so it's more like you're reading a play than an actual text. Aristotle finally just gives us the facts. So, poetical language, but you see how he has these elements are at war with each other, making offenses against each other, but necessity's here to make sure everyone gets what's just, and in the end, they're all nice and balanced, and it's all fair. And so, no one element overtakes the others. So, elements are opposed to each other, and initially came into being when the opposite separated off from the boundless due to its motion. So, I think he has a notion of, since it looks like if you go outside at night, and watch a star for a long, long time, that star rotates, right? Stop thinking about the earth is rotating for a second. Try to put yourself in an old Greek view. All the heavens and everything rotate around you. So because of that, I think he viewed the apeiron as also, somehow, this physical substance is rotating. And in that motion, then as fire separates off, water also had to separate off. And as air separates off, earth also had to separate off. So somehow the motion of that apeiron is causing the elements to come into being instead of everything being combined together into this just stable apeiron.
That sounds a little bit more like Greek mythology.
It's like I said, yeah, it's not going to be great till we get to.
That's his argument for why they're separate.
We do not have people giving formal arguments that we're aware of for why they think what they think until Parmenides. Parmenides is going to be the first one, even though it's still a poem. We can actually read and follow and analyze his argument.
But what he's saying is, this motion is what keeps the land with the land and the sea with the sea.
No, this is what spun things off in the beginning. This is how they initially came into being. So this is a bit of a cosmology.
Creation story.
Kind of, yeah.
I see.
And so this kicks off his cosmology. He gives a pretty elaborate cosmology that I didn't think was worth trying to wrap our heads around because you're not going to get a lot out of it the same way that this isn't giving you much for how his actual physics works. So we'll continue on skipping over his cosmology and go to his next pupil, which is Anaximenes. Unless we had any more questions about Anaximander.
Do we have someone to present that?
I don't think so. Let's see. We're missing people, so. You're Zeno, you're Heraclitus,
Oh, right, she's not doing it.
and
Alfred wasn't able to make it, but he's Pythagoras.
Pythagoras will be next week. So I don't think we have a presentation. And I don't think we have one on Anaximenes either, right?
Yeah.
We do?
No, we don't.
Oh, we don't. Okay. So, done with Anaximander. He thought the one stuff was apeiron, this indefinite, boundless, infinite material. Maybe we make one more comment about the infiniteness of it that for some reason I didn't have in there. It's a good idea that he picked something that was infinite as his one stuff, because then you can draw on it as much as you need to create everything that ever is going to happen. So Aristotle makes a particular comment that his use of something infinite was a good idea, and it's appealing to have that as our fundamental principle, because we can use it for something infinite now, the universe. If the universe is infinite, that's okay, because we have an infinite amount of stuff. The apeiron, this infinite, indefinite, boundless substance. Okay, so our next one then is Anaximenes, student of Anaximander. Still in Miletus, that exact same city. These are the three from that city. He was also an astronomer, and he's a philosopher. He's going to be the last of the Milesian school. You're going to notice that, well, it's still a little bit a ways away, but pretty soon the Persians are going to conquer, and then we see once the Persians take over, no one else comes out of Miletus. Worth mentioning. So Anaximenes, last in Milesian school. Now, he believed that the universe was full of air. He didn't like Anaximander saying that the earth just sits there by itself, not resting upon anything. So he thought that the universe was full of air and that the earth was flat and rode on the air the same way that it was a disc shape. So the earth, he thought, was a disc, not a cylinder, but flatten that out and you got it right, a disc. And that it rides on the air like a frisbee thrown right here that you know in your day-to-day life.
So he suggested spinning then.
He's going to say that the earth is spinning.
Traveling.
Is he going to say spinning?
Well,
He says it rides on the air like a disc. It is moving. So he has the sun actually circulating the earth in the same way that flat earth people think that the sun goes around the earth. I don't know if you've ever read how they think it happens, but they pretty much stole his idea. They don't think that the sun goes down, around, and back up. They think it rides around on it. And due to how big the disk is and how far away it gets, it goes out of our sight and then comes back into our sight. Yeah.
And the sun's smaller than it really is.
Yeah, so he's going to say that the sun's much smaller than Anaximander says it is. He's going to say that the earth rides on air rather than just sitting there. And the sun, rather than being way bigger than the earth, is going to be the small thing that goes around it. So in some ways it seems like he's regressing from what Anaximander said, but there's some areas that he actually improved, so we'll get to those. He also had produced written works, none of which are extant, so can't read anything that he actually said. Now he is also a material monist. He liked Anaximander's idea of making the one stuff some infinite substance. What he's going to call that one stuff, well, let's just read this. Thought that the fundamental substance was infinite like Anaximander, but disagreed with its being indefinite. How can you say that it's this apeiron, indefinite stuff? By virtue of it being indefinite, you can't know anything about it.
Right.
So you're completely speculating about something that there's no way for us to know about, and now we just have to take your word for it. So he says, no, indefinite, you're cheating, you're trying to cut a corner. We can't say that. So the ultimate stuff must be a knowable empirical substance. He chose air, spelled a little bit weird there, which is basically what we think of air, but a more dense, moist air. Okay, so from here on out, we won't bother making that distinction. You'll be pretty safe to think about air, but if you were to read it and you see that A-E-R, that's why, because he's trying to make a little bit of a distinction, not air that we're used to, but air, something a little bit more dense, and with a little bit more moisture in it, as the one stuff. But anyways, so he thought it was air. Now remember that he thinks that the universe is full of air. He says that the one stuff is air, so now the universe is full of his one stuff. And so since he chose air and decided that it needs to be infinite, so it needs to be everywhere, so the same way that we have air up here, you also have air 10,000 miles up. No notion of some atmosphere around the earth. It's air all throughout the universe now, the same way that we have air right here. And now you can kind of understand how, okay, maybe it's not so ridiculous that he thought that the earth was now riding on this thing like a disc.
Yeah.
And that sounds a little bit less absurd when you think about the whole universe as being full of air the same way that we have air right here, just atmosphere forever.
So when he talks about the air that the Earth is riding on, is he talking about that air or the
Yes.
other air? And that other air is different from the air we breathe?
When we say, he's from a coastal city, so I don't know how much it was close to the air that he's used to talking about. But when we talk about air, we typically mean void of any moisture. he intentionally meant that there's a little bit of moisture in the air.
Okay.
A more moist air. But if you just think about regular air the way that we're used to thinking about it, it won't steer you wrong.
Okay.
Okay?
So why does he have the notion? Do you know why he has the notion that the Earth is somehow riding on it instead of being stable? Because even if he says it's a disk and not a cylinder, why does it?
Because how do things stay up in the air?
How do things flow?
He already has a notion of,
Frisbee.
yeah, tossing a disc, staying up, and it just stays up.
Even then, it has to be gradually falling.
Well, there's not.
But maybe the Earth is gradually falling. What does that matter?
in the universe, and we're just all.
So why is it riding and not just constantly in a free fall?
Because it's not tilted.
Because it's infinite. And when you fall in infinity, what does it matter?
That's what I'm saying. So why is it riding? Why is it moving away instead of just in a free fall?
It's not moving away from anything, it's just moving.
It's floating. I would guess that he would say something along the lines of, if it was just an immediate free fall, that would somehow be detectable. I don't know.
Okay.
And we don't have much knowledge on how exactly he thought of this. It's just a side note that Aristotle makes. Something along the lines of, he thought the universe was full of air, and so the Earth rides on the air, much like a disk rides on air. Something to that effect is pretty much all we have. Now, why did he choose air? He thought of air as being the closest physical thing to Anaximander's apeiron. It's the most indefinite of things that he could think of that's still a physical thing that we can talk about. So he's very much following his teacher still. He's just going to pick the closest physical thing he can find to apeiron, which he chose air. And now he has a wonderful theory for explaining how everything comes into being and goes away, how air converts to all these other things. You never had from Thales how water magically turns to dirt, or how dirt magically turns to water, etc. And you never had from Anaximander, except for a metaphorical language, how on earth you actually get air turning into water or water turning into air. Anaximenes is going to explain how all these states change into each other, and he's going to explain it all through a process of rarefication and condensation. Rarefication meaning we separate it more and more, condensation meaning we contract it more and more.
So like diffusion.
Say that again?
It's like diffusion, like how the molecules have more space in between them.
Yes.
Air, and if they're closer together, that's the closest it starts.
Right, so found a little animated drawing that kind of explains what he thought. So we got air right here, and he thought if you take air and you separate it more, then you've got steam, and if you can somehow rarefy it more, then you have smoke, and if you can rarefy it even more, then you got fire. So you have fire, you condense it some, you have smoke, you condense it some, you have steam, you condense it some, you have air, condense it more, you have mist, condense it more, you have water, condense it more, you have mud, dirt, stone.
I love that.
And then everything that we see is just combinations of these things. But he thought, so this is the process that you see, and this is what you experience when, well, this is how materials change between each other. Now, another thing that he is going to implicitly or explicitly state somewhere, I'm not sure if this can come up. Okay, here's exactly what it is. Prove that heat was associated with rarefication and cool with condensation. So, not only does he say that, but he says as you apply heat, that's how you rarefy something, and as you cool it down, that is how you condense something, which is very much exactly the way it is. If you use, I don't know if anyone's done chemistry or physics, the ideal gas law.
P equals VT.
PV equals T, R, where R is a constant, N, number of molecules. But so the I'm not sure the way that you want to say that. As temperature goes up, volume goes up, or density goes down. So he very much knew this relation, or I shouldn't say knew, he very much predicted this relationship between temperature and volume, or temperature and pressure. And he had a cool little way of proving it. He said, I can prove this to you really quick. Notice really quick when you hold out your hand, if you blow on it and you condense the air as you blow on it, it's cool. But if you open your mouth wide, so that you breathe out and it's rarefied, it's hot. There you go. Is that one a little weird to you? Is the air changing temperature? What's going on there? Was he right? Who knows why that's actually the case?
It's probably coming out different.
He's wrong. All the air that comes out of you is actually going to be warmer because it's been heated up by your body. But when you blow, it still feels cool. What's going on there? Give you something to mull over a little bit.
My guess is it bounces off, but that's not true.
How fast it's traveling so it loses heat?
No. How does it lose heat?
When you air around it.
Yeah, you're kind of leaning towards something.
Does it have to do with-
Actually, I guess you guys don't know. It comes from physics. The volume, in short, the faster the air is moving, the more it sucks in the air around it and pushes it along with it. So you're actually feeling a lot of room temperature air with the air coming out of you versus you're feeling a lot less of the room temperature air with the air coming out. But the amazing thing here is that it's a very physical demonstration of his idea, a way that he could show, no, this actually does work.
So if
The only difference between and is how condensed or rarefied the air is, right?
So it feels cooler because
It's more room temperature air, less of the air inside of you.
because of the speed that it's going, or because of the density?
Nope. Well, the speed that it's going, so in a fluid, the faster your velocity, the lower the pressure.
Okay.
And so, the lower the pressure, the more air collapses in. So when I blow, and then I create almost like a mini vacuum, like the air has a little bit less pressure, and so now more air around it gets sucked in real quick, and it falls along in the stream. So it sucks in the air around us.
The dust particles that float around, I'd see that.
I never thought about doing that, but yeah, you can probably
yeah.
blow with dust particles and get a good sense of what's going on.
Yeah, you can see it coming.
Anyways, so the primary difference in the forms of air as matter is the degree of condensation and density. You condense it more and more and more, you eventually get a different material. And so I think you understand this so well and how his thought process was for how different elements change to different elements. So not a bad little idea. So worse than Anaximander in some ways, but definitely better than him in other ways, and actually giving an explanation for how this change occurs. So I think this, once again, is coming from Aristotle. Anaximenes, you understand what happened with the 3 dots when I do 3 dots like that?
There's a lot of
Yeah,
this,
no.
is-
It's either that it's not relevant or you don't know.
Yeah, okay, so it could have been Anaximenes, comma, the third member of the Milesian school, comma, said that, and so you really quick remove the stuff that didn't really add to the idea you're explaining. So Anaximenes said that air is the principle of existing things, for from it all things come to be, and into it they are again dissolved. As our soul, he says, being air, holds us together and controls us, so does wind and air enclose the whole world. Air and wind mean the same thing here. So not only does he think physical things are made up of air, he still is a material monist. Everything is made up of air, including the human soul, including spirits, including gods. Everything is composed of air. And it's not too strange that he would think the soul is somehow air. We are told that Anaximenes made gods and divine things come from air as well. Now, we make that note because even though we still weren't sure what exactly Thales meant by everything is divine and gods are in everything, whatever he meant, by the time Anaximenes is talking about it and he says, and whatever that is, those things are also made up of air.
Did Thales come up with the idea of a soul?
No, soul is old.
That you have an intelligence outside of yourself?
Well, the notion, how we think about the word soul, is going to change a lot over the time. The best that we can say for what for sure these early Greeks meant by what we translate as soul here is a moving principle.
So how big?
Something responsible for motion occurring.
So the reason I'm able to move my fingers is because of my soul.
Yes, your soul is what enables you to move your fingers. Animals also have souls because they have a moving principle.
What about
And it's somehow tied with the word anime, comes from the same, or whatever's at the root of animal. It means basically a moving thing. That same moving thing ultimately somehow derives from the same word
do you
Greeks
think
use for soul.
planets have souls? Do you know?
I'm not sure if these guys early on did. By the time we get to the Pythagoreans, they for sure did. The Orphic religion did. Thought about plants as living things, so they also have a soul. Because they believe in the transmigration of the souls. So based off of how you live this existence, you're going to be reincarnated possibly as a plant, but you could also be
Well, Bell
an
is
animal.
not that all matter, not a soul. That's
The all is divine, yeah. And, oh yeah, actually, yeah, good point. Thales thought everything had souls, so yeah, never mind. Because he looked at magnets for one example. Magnets can somehow get another thing to move, so it must have a moving principle, so it must have a soul. So yeah, everything has souls. Everything has a moving principle. Good catch. Anaximenes, okay, so he thought earthquakes were due to too little or too much moisture in the earth.
what?
Going to give you some of his other scientific processes. Notice now he's giving a cause for earthquakes. Obviously it's terrible, but the point is earthquakes aren't because Zeus mad. And I love how he thought about lightning. So he thought you have the clouds up here, and sometimes due to the wind, clouds suddenly separate. Which means if the clouds are suddenly separating, you get a sudden rarefication really, really fast. Rarefication means lots of heat. And so lots of heat shoots out a lightning bolt, fire. And so that's what lightning is. So that's actually pretty cool. When rainbows are formed when densely compressed air is touched by the rays of the sun. That's pretty close to exactly what it is. So had a good notion for what happens with rainbows. And notice that he was always looking for unifying causes for diverse phenomena, trying to explain it all with his rarefication and his condensation, trying to explain everything in terms of these things. Okay, so that finishes our Milesian school. Any question about Anaximenes before we move on?
I'm curious, did you have any thinking behind why earthquakes are due to either too little or too much, and not just one or the other?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know why he thought that. I just know that that was one of the little fragments I saw.
Well, maybe because it's changing state, since it's going closer to mud than it was to earth. So maybe that process created the shakes.
Right, but how and why is what's a little bit murky there. Anyways, okay, so quick recap on the Milesian school that we just finished. We had the three main: Thales, Anaximander, and then Anaximenes. Thales, all is water. Anaximander, the Apiron, and then Anaximenes, air. And now we get to Xenophanes of Colophon. So he is the first one that's not from Miletus. We're done with people from Miletus. He's from Colophon. And Colophon is right... not on the map. I don't know why I have this map here. Miletus is right here. Ephesus is right here. That's where our next guy's going to be from, Heraclitus. Colophon is right here, but we don't have it on the map. You know what this map is showing, zoomed in on Greece, right?
Yeah.
Lydia's over here. Okay. So he's from a city roughly right there. He travels a lot, so maybe I think I have another map. Okay, there's a better one. Okay, so Colophon is right there. That's where he's from. He's going to end up doing a lot of traveling. One of the places he's going to end up, I manually put that in there, that's why it looks weird. He's going to end up Elia. A lot of our next philosophers are going to be from Elia. We call them the Eleatics, so that's a city worth note. Notice that this is over here at the bottom of Italy, Elia. So he starts out in Colophon. Quickly read this. He made major contributions in epistemology, metaphysics, and theology. And now we'll jump down here. So he left Ionia at the age of 25. Why? He left Colophon at the age of 25. This is when the Medes invade. That's his terminology. Remember that the Greeks don't see difference between the Medes and the Persians, since the Persians just rise up. It's like an internal revolt. So one of the ways that we're able to date him is he says that he left Colophon when the Medes came. When the Mede came at age 25 and traveled the world from then on out, traveled Greece from then on out for 67 years.
Great day old.
So, oh yeah, you'll notice a lot of these guys, I mean, as soon as they die, it's often like 60. So they live from like 60 to 100 with a lot of these guys. Pretty strange. Pretty healthy people. Anyways, so he leaves here, pretty much travels the Greek world, spends a lot of time over here, and we're going to see that he has a major influence on these Eleatics that come after him. If any of you have already started on Parmenides, you'll see some roots of Parmenides in them. So that's 25 traveled for 67 years. Now he's very critical of the Greeks' veneration of athleticism, and thought Greeks should pay more attention to their poets. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, did you say that he lived for 67 years or he left?
Traveled
at
for
25?
67 years. He left at 25.
92, so he was 92.
Yeah, so he was 25 when what he calls the Medes, but the Persians conquered Lydia and put a tyrant in place in Colophon.
How do you
Which-
just get out? Can you just get out?
There's massive trade networks going on. I mean, the Persians, as they conquer, they're not going to want to just shut down everything going on.
But would you have to smuggle yourself out?
I'm not sure to what extent you would have had to smuggle yourself out. You could probably just leave. While it sounds like Cyrus is pretty hard on Lydia, he's actually known as a benevolent ruler the world over. So, for example, if you know a little bit of history of the Jews, so you'll know that Judea and Jerusalem survived the Assyrian Empire, but then the Babylonian Empire comes along and conquers them. They get transported back to Babylon, which is where like the book of Daniel in the lion's pit happens. Then they have their exodus back out of Babylon back to Jerusalem. When Cyrus the Great comes back and conquers Babylon, he lets them all go home, and he actually helps them pay to build their temple again.
I just went across this. Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, Cyrus the Great. So Cyrus the Great is known to most of the world. He is benevolent compared to the Babylonians and compared to the Assyrians. So he's known as a kind of ruler. He just isn't very happy with these Ionian cities. For those of you that weren't here last week, we call the city-states along here the Ionians. The cities along there, not city-states. They are not city-states, they're just cities. City-state means you're your own political entity. They're under the Persian Empire. But yeah, so that's one of the ways that we're able to date him, is we know that he left when Persia conquered Colophon and then traveled Greece for 67 years after that. So, dies at 92, roughly. I can't remember your question. Did I answer it?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so he was very critical of the Greeks' veneration for athleticism. You know that the Greeks had their Olympics, and to win the Olympics was a big deal. And oftentimes your city-state, if you won the Olympics for them, you could live a life of luxury at the expense of the state from there on out. So they very much venerated, that's a good word for it, their athletes. And he's very critical of that. He says, no, you should pay more attention to your poets. Now this sounds weird to us when we think about poets today, but remember, for these early Greeks, you have two basic educations. You have your physical education to make sure you're physically fit and healthy, but then you also have your education in poetry. This is learning your Homer, this is learning your Hesiod. This was the other part of your education. You couldn't go take a math class, that wasn't a thing. So your poetry and the poets are where you get your second education. This is what teaches you to be things like a good ruler. So he thinks it's poets that help rulers know how to manage their cities. Because it's not your athletic training, and there's only two types of training. There's poetry and there's athletics. So remember, philosophy is still on the rise. It's not seen as its own individual thing until Pythagoras kind of helps kick that off. So when he's talking about poets, if we were to translate this to more modern notions, he'd be saying you should pay more attention to academia than you do to sports. Continuing on. Okay, now he is the first one to distinguish between true belief and knowledge. And this is actually a very important distinction. Because imagine that you ask me, hey Donnie, how many steps are there coming up to this building? And I say, I don't know, 27. Right? That's my guess, and that's my honest guess. So I believe it's 27 right now. It's my best guess. Now I could happen to be right. Say you go out there and you actually count it, and it's 27. Did I know that there were 27 steps? No, I just happened to be right. Another example, maybe I asked Jacob directions to go to some city, and Jacob gives me those directions. And I never actually get around to going, but someone comes along and they ask me, hey, do you know how to get to the city? And I say, yeah, and I give them the same directions that Jacob gave me. I believe that those were the true directions, but did I know that those directions led to that city? No, it was just a true belief. And so just because you happen to say something that's true, and just because you happen to believe something that's true, does not mean that you know that that thing is true. and this is a very important conversation for the rest of philosophy from here on out, what is the difference between knowledge and something that you just think is true? When can we say that you actually know something? So Xenophon is the one who's going to kick off this conversation. Claim that there actually exists a truth of reality, but that humans as mortals are unable to know it. So there is reality, it's possible to know. There is reality, there's truths about reality, but us poor mortals, we can't know it. But what we can do, maybe he says it in this next line, yet the gods have not revealed all things to men from the beginning, but by seeking, men find out better in time. So while you can't know, you can't have knowledge of the way that things are, you can improve your beliefs as time goes on and align them better and better with what's actually true. That's what he's saying there. There never was, nor will he a man. I'm guessing that's supposed to be a B. There never was, nor will be a man who has certain knowledge about the gods and about all the things I speak of. Even if he should chance to say the complete truth, yet he himself knows not that it is so. So, falling down that exact same vein. Any questions on any of those? Were you raising your hand? No? I'm scratching. Okay. Now, Xenophanes, when it comes to what he thought, as far as the one stuff, isn't going to be too inspired. So he hypothesized that the earth must have once been covered in water from an examination of fish fossils in the mountains. So he's in Greece, finds fossils up in the mountains. He concludes that means that fish must have been here once, meaning water.
Does he have the works of the three philosophers that just came before?
He would have known about them to some extent. And then, since we're covering people in Ionia, then we're going to jump over and cover people in Italy. Then Pythagoras is also before him. And so he also knew about Pythagoras. And we'll see him mentioned too here. Maybe it's him or it's Heraclitus. One of them makes reference to him. But yes, he would have definitely known about Thales for sure. Thales was a big deal in his day. He was one of the 7 sages. As far as knowing about the other two, I would guess yes, but I'm not positive. So he noticed that, hey, fish fossils way up here. Earth must have once been covered in water. And he also observed water coming from the ceilings of caves, which kind of seems like water is coming out of Earth. And so he held that the fundamental substances he split into two were the wet and the dry, or water and earth. Now, it's important to note that wet and dry and water and earth, in his mind, are synonymous, and wet and dry are not properties of water and earth, but somehow synonymous. We're going to see later on when thinking splits those and says, no, water happens to be wet, but water and wet are not the same thing. Wet is a property, water is a substance. So he's still using those as the same, but he thought it was those two. And they cycled between each other, obviously. Another typo. Yeah, and they. You got to mention both of them. So he seemed to have this weird notion of the earth transforms into water, which cycles back to earth, which cycles back to water, which cycles back to earth, which explains how water levels rise and eventually cover the earth and then go away and rise and go away and rise. So he would have thought that we were on this cycle of going from water to earth. So we had earth that was once covered with water, no longer covered with water because the water is changing into the earth in the big picture. I'm sure that they can break down into each other a little bit overall, but there's a big cycle going on where overall all the water is changing into earth. Anyways, continuing, all things come from the earth, and in the earth all things end. We're speculating that we think he thought everything, that it was water and earth. Some people just say that he said earth, and this is going to be one of those fragments that help them justify that. So it's an opinion that he said water and earth, but some people say no, he was just talking about earth, not really water. All things are earth and water that come into being and grow. There's another fragment which argues for both. Thought earth was infinitely wide, infinitely deep, and so not supported by anything. So pretty big regression from the other two. Can't remember the little story. It's like an old lady goes to, I think it's like Feynman, famous physicist, one of his lectures, and he talked about how the earth was just sitting there, and this old lady gets mad and she says, "That's ridiculous. Everyone knows that the earth is on the back of the turtle, And he says, "Okay, what's the turtle standing on?" She says, "That's a nice try, clever boy. It's turtle all the way down." So, infinite earth, infinite all the way down. Not supported by anything. Okay, really weird idea of what the sun is. But the best, he thought it was a new sun every time. And the best I could pick up is he thought during the day and night, all the fires that we build rise to the sky, right? You see fire goes up. So the best I could tell is he seemed to think that these fires collect into the sun, and that's the next sun that you see. So it's a new sun each time. It's a collection of all these fires. And maybe he had some explanation for why this is why some days are hotter than other days, or I don't know. Seems like there's a lot more fire in winter.
Yeah.
So I don't know how exactly to make sense out of that, but the best I can tell, that's literally what he thinks, is that the fires rising up are what produces the next sun that we see for the next day. Now he is extremely critical of Greek religion. This is what he's most famous for. In particular, Homer and Hesiod. Now, I haven't ever read any of Hesiod, but I have with the Iliad and the Odyssey from Homer. And, well, we'll just read his quote. "Homer and Hesiod have attributed to the gods all things that are shame and blameworthy among men, stealing and committing adultery and deceiving each other." So if you ever read some Greek mythology, you were most likely reading Homer and possibly Hesiod. I don't know what Hesiod wrote.
It's full of stealing.
Yeah, and you have gods doing things like this left and right all the time. I mean, one example you might know a little bit about Hercules. Hercules, his dad is Zeus, but his mom is immortal. Now, I'm not sure exactly what happened there. Maybe Aphrodite tempted Zeus into mating with the mortal woman to produce Hercules. Who knows how it goes? But the point is, Zeus is very susceptible to being tempted into doing things. He commits adultery left and right, steals things, all sorts of stuff. So, Xenophon thought that the fact that Homer and Hesiod did this, and this is the base of our education, is terrible. I mean, that's just flat out blasphemy, almost, right?
I'm sure that was a very unpopular opinion.
Huh?
I'm sure that's a very unpopular opinion. Meaning, wasn't Homer kind of esteemed as like...
Oh yeah, you didn't argue with Homer. If Homer said it, it's written in stone. You don't argue with Homer. And he didn't like the way that the Greeks would anthropomorphize the gods, make them like humans. He goes on to say that it's not really a coincidence that the Ethiopians, I don't know if you know where Ethiopia is, it's down in Africa. So the Ethiopians say that their gods are snub-nosed and black, and the Thracians are to the north of Greece, say that theirs have blue eyes and red hair. In other words, everywhere we go, we see people talking about the gods looking just like them. And so since you, Homer and Hesiod, know people around you acting this way, behaving this way, looking this way, this is how you say the gods behave. He goes on to explain in a more elaborate way, but I broke it down, that if horses, oxen, or lions could make art, they too would render figures of gods in their own images. If a horse could make gods, they would make them horse gods. And if lions could do it, they make their gods look like lions, etc. So he goes on to say, I insert that in, there is one God, greatest among gods and men, in no way similar to mortals, either in body or in thought. So, just one God, and he's not anything like what Homer and Hesiod talk about. He goes on explaining his view of the one God. So the one God, always he remains in the same place, moving not at all, nor is it fitting for him to go to different places at different times. But without toil, he shakes all things by thoughts of his mind. If he needs to do something, he doesn't got to stand up, go over, and do it. It's just a thought, and it just happens. So we've got a sense of this God being some all-powerful God. Now, this is a sentence that I've read like 3 different ways it's translated. This is the one that seemed like it had the most natural language. All of him sees, all thinks, all hears, and unity is God. Now, we'll look at that left one first. All of him sees, all thinks, all hears. That seems kind of like a omnipresent God. Somehow this God is everywhere and knows everything. So between the top one, the top line in that sentence, you kind of got the 3 basic properties that Christians typically attribute to their God. Omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. All-knowing, all-powerful, and everywhere. And then he said unity is God. For those of you getting into Parmenides already, you can see how that's harkening back to Parmenides a little bit. Thought of the world as divine and God as being coextensive with the universe. So there's going to be some weird contradictions that come up with Xenophanes that confused Aristotle, and frankly confused me too. But so he talks about the God having these properties, but then he seems to talk about the God as though the entire universe, everything in existence, and God are one and the same. So he's still a materialist. God is still a very physical thing in his mind, and somehow it's the same thing as the universe. He's the one that introduces the concept of being. We're going to be using that a lot, being as things' existence, as opposed to non-being, non-existence. And so God is immortal. Let me read that one more time. Introduce the concept of being as opposed to non-being, and so God is immortal. I'm not sure why I phrased it like that. That sounds weird. But I thought of God as being immortal, and God is everything in existence, everything that exists. Oh, since God is everything that existence, and existence is being, then it's not non-being, which is non-existence. So God is immortal. Following his logic, something like that. And then he also introduced the notion that being cannot change. So this is where we're going to get a lot of confusion with him, because he's saying that God is everything in existence, and so he's being, and being cannot change, and yet we see change in the universe all the time. I took a step. God is supposed to be unchanging. God is everything. I just took a step. I'm a part of something. I'm a part of God. Doesn't that mean God just took a step? Didn't God just change if I take a step?
Is he saying that God is everything or God is everywhere?
So at first it seems like he's talking more like a Christian God. And then there's lines that come back to him saying, no, everything is God. And God is everything. And God is the one, and all is the one, and everything comes from the one.
It's a little weird.
It's very strange language, and it's hard to make sense of what exactly he's after. So, yeah. So all interpretations of Xenophanes are just that, interpretations. Aristotle complains that it's difficult to know what Xenophanes is saying. God has a body, and yet he moves all things by intellect. God is motionless, and yet all things move. And then can they all be God if God is unity? Doesn't that mean everything is supposed to be one? So for those of you getting into Parmenides, you can see how this kind of underlies some of what Parmenides is going to get to, but Parmenides is going to give much better insight into his thinking, and we'll actually know why he thought what he thought. But with Xenophanes, hard to know what he's after. Next, Heraclitus. What do you think? We got time for Heraclitus? It's kind of a big one. Let's get a feel for what you guys want. Yes, continue with Heraclitus, or you're feeling overloaded. He'd be the last of the Ionian school, so it wouldn't be a terrible place to stop after him.
Yes.
But I don't want to overload you guys. You're going to miss it.
I feel kind of like I'm not going to remember any of this.
You feel like you're not going to remember any of this?
But
Raise your hand if you want to keep going. Let's just keep it
I don't
simple.
mind.
1, 2, 3. And you raise your hand anyways. 4. You're the one that turns the tide, and now we continue going. All right. Heraclitus of Ephesus, 535 BC to 475 BC. He stays in Ephesus the entire time, so he flat out lives under the Persian rule and the Persian Empire. Ephesus, once again, we'll see, is right over here. So very close to Miletus. Colophon was right here. So Colophon, Ephesus, Miletus. Oh, Miletus is right there. Miletus, Ephesus, Colophon. And so you can see they're all very close together, all bunched up. So very likely that they all knew about each other to some extent. Heraclitus. Okay. So a little bit about his life. It said that he refused hereditary kingship. Now, not really sure if that's an actual kingship or just a high political office, but apparently his family occupied a high political office or kingship in Ephesus. When it was eventually offered to him, when it was his turn in line, he passed it, told his little brother to go take it. So, didn't want to be a ruler in a city or have a high political office. Now, he is a very proud misanthrope. Everyone know what a misanthrope is?
No.
Very low opinion of humans and humanity.
Yeah.
Okay? He doesn't think much of you. Bitterly critical of the multitude. Doesn't think much of you, doesn't think you can know much. Just, yeah. Probably not a nice guy to ever meet in real life. Okay. He wrote, just like everyone else, a book called On Nature, probably a title attributed to an actual work he had later, but nonetheless he had a work and we call it On Nature, which is supposed to have been divided into 3 sections. The first dealing with the universe, the second dealing with politics, and the third dealing with, the last dealing with theology. So notice that he's going to be the first one that has strong opinions on politics now. Most people kind of limit themselves to talking about the universe as a whole, a little bit about gods. He's going to actually have a lot to say about actual politics. We have approximately 120 fragments of him that are his actual words. You can go read his exact quotes that we have from him, which all these arguments come from. It won't take you that long to do. You can Google Heraclitus fragments and read them all. But you're going to have a tough time. Because even back in the day with his contemporaries, he was known as the obscure, the riddler, the dark. Because his writing is not very clear. And now we do not have the majority of his writing, we just have these fragments. So now we're trying to make sense of fragments that, even in context, it was hard to interpret what on earth this man was talking about. And so you are going to see people use Heraclitus to argue point A to point Z, and everything in between. They're going to argue that he's saying this and not this. Other people are going to say, no, he's saying the exact opposite of what you just said. And he'll be argued at both ends of the spectrum like that. Okay, the author had some stuff that I thought was worth putting in here. Author. If it is always hazardous to attempt the construction of a coherent doctrine from a few direct quotes and the comments of ancient writers, the matter becomes a good deal more complicated in the case of Heraclitus. And then here's how you know that the author has actually thought about it and tried to interpret some of these. The fragments are largely gnomic, oracular, meaning like from an oracle. So the fragments are largely gnomic, oracular utterances, highly paradoxical, replete with metaphors and puns. And that is just an apt description of what these fragments are like, if you go and you start reading these and try to make sense of it. Now, the puns one, unfortunately, since it's translated from Greek, we're going to miss out on a lot of the puns. Everyone know what a pun is? I was once thinking about lightning, then it struck me. Or I once wondered what caused lightning, then it struck me, something like that. I can't remember the common one, something like that. Here's an example to give you a feel for Heraclitus. The bow's name is life, though its work is death. Now, apparently, this is a play on bow and life being the same word when we got in the Greek language. And so this already throws you one of these. What is he saying here? He's not just making a joke. Chances are he's actually arguing a doctrine. Is he saying that while you kill with a bow, that's also how you preserve life, because you have to go hunting with a bow and you have to kill an animal to stay alive? Or is he talking about war? If you want to stay alive in war, you got to kill the other guy and use the bow to do that. And he just happened to choose the bow as a weapon because it made the pun work as opposed to saying the sword or something like that. So that kind of stuff is what makes him hard to interpret, hard to understand exactly what he's saying. So we're going to go over fragments and just kind of group them on 5 major topics that he talks about. We'll go over the ones on logos, the ones on his theology, the one on fire as a fundamental substance. So some people claim that he is a material monist and he thinks that everything is composed of fire. Some people say, nope, that's not what he's saying, and we'll see both sides of it. We'll see him talking about unity and opposites. It's the opposites. Well, we'll get into it more, see what exactly that means. And then this is his big one, number 5, everything is becoming. Everything is becoming. He thinks everything is in a constant state of change, always changing into something else. It isn't something, it's always becoming something. So we'll get into each of these a little bit more, starting with the logos. Now, how many of you have actually come across that word before, logos? Do you remember in context to what?
Ethos. It was speech.
Persuasion.
Oh, persuasion. So Aristotle talks about it, ethos, pathos, and logos. Logos being the logic of the argument.
Yeah.
Have you ever come across it somewhere else?
Well, just in talking about words and
In general terminology and symbolism, like symbols.
I mean, logos doesn't like what aside from logic, just it's associated with words and thinking.
All right. Well, okay. So we'll jump into it then. So these fragments, a lot of ways going to be saying is that the world is in accordance with logos, and it's hard to get an interpretation for what exactly this word logos means early on with the Greeks. He's the one that's going to introduce this word into philosophy, and then we're going to see it pop up a lot of places, and the meaning change over time. You see by the time we got to Aristotle talking about his rhetoric, he uses logos specifically for the logic of the argument, right? Or the argument of the persuasion, I meant, sorry. It's the argument that you actually use to persuade one, when you could use other things like the fact that you come from a high position, or you could appeal to their emotions. Another way is to give an argument. That's when we use persuade, he uses logos for that. So this is the first fragment of Heraclitus that we have. This was at the very opening of his book, so we're able to place it, which also gives us a little bit of a sense for what he was going to cover in this book. But now let's get some straight up Heraclitus. Of the logos, which is as I described it, men always prove to be uncomprehending, both before they have heard it, and when once they have heard it. For although all things happen according to this logos, men are like people of no experience. Even when they experience such words and deeds as I explain, when I distinguish each thing according to its constitution and declare how it is, but the rest of men fail to notice what they do after they wake up, just as they forget what they do when asleep. You got it? Yeah, kind of. You have a vague notion for what exactly he's going for here. But we see him throwing this logos in there, and it seems like maybe with the way that he's using this, it's like an account of some sort, but maybe his account of how something is going to happen. He's going to explain to you the way that things are, and men are going to have a hard time understanding what he's going to tell them. Yeah, it seems kind of like the gist of what he's going for here. Now, fortunately, later Stoics, in a lot of ways, took a liking to Heraclitus. And so they used logos, and they had a very particular way that they used logos. They used logos as the account which governs everything. So the Stoics, skipping ahead a little bit, in their cosmology, the universe is on cycles, everything's predetermined. I've been standing here giving this lecture infinitely many times in the past, and I will do it infinitely many times in the future. So all of existence is on this cycle, and this cycle, everything that happens is according to the logos. So the logos is a story of everything that's going to happen, in short. And then the famous one that I thought you guys were going to say, we also see this word coming up right at the beginning of, not the beginning of the New Testament Bible, but the beginning of the book of John. The opening statement is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. The Old Testament, or the New Testament, was first written in Greek, or at least that's our earliest copies extant. And the word that they're actually translating there was logos. And it just so happened in the King James Version, they chose to interpret logos as word.
So what does it actually mean?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So we don't know what this word means.
I don't feel any more clear about what logos actually means.
Well, it can mean any of those.
How people use a word evolves with time. So it's clear how Aristotle was using the word because he's very clear about how he uses things. But how exactly Heraclitus was using the word,
If you
hard to
think of
know.
it as account, in the beginning there was the account was God.
Maybe.
What does it mean today? How is it used?
Logic?
Logos, I think most people, well, I don't know how most people use it today. That's what I was kind of curious about, so I was asking you.
I just knew ethos logos.
Okay, oops, did I skip one? No. Okay, so more on logos. We're going to read some fragments here, try to give you a gist for what I think he's going for at the top, and then we'll go over the fragments. So what I think he's getting at with a bunch of these fragments is, wisdom comes from applying a sort of common sense to many particular experiences of life. So that's what I think he's going for here. Now we'll read a couple of them. Knowing much doesn't teach you how to think. Next one. Men who love wisdom should acquaint themselves with many particulars. Okay, now you see how it seems like those are paradoxical. Knowing much doesn't teach you how to think. Men who love wisdom, men who want to be good at thinking, should acquaint themselves with many particulars.
That makes sense.
No, those align.
Those align?
Yeah.
It aligns in the way that you placed it in the beginning.
Oh, because of how I said this.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is what I think he's going after with these things. Now, see, maybe I shouldn't have done that. I don't want to like put a certain tint on your perspective, so that you automatically think about it the way that I ended up thinking about it. Because my opinion, obviously, is no way special. I'm just giving you my thoughts. Now, a little one about this, he knew about Pythagoras, so any of you have already gotten into Pythagoras, you know how he also gets into more mystic stuff. So he's being critical of Pythagoras because Pythagoras, not only did he know a lot, but he did a lot of stuff that we would just call absurd. And so he's a perfect example to someone like Heraclitus that says, you can know everything that there is to know, and yet still not know how to think.
Right.
What comes to my mind is Socrates. I mean, he goes around to people who he thinks should know a lot, but then
Yep,
Men
there's
love wisdom
a
and
little bit of that. What we're going to see with Socrates is a focus on definition.
Oh, I actually do see how those are paradox.
Well, yeah, if I didn't show you this first, and if you just read those two, you'd say those are saying the exact opposite things. Knowing much doesn't teach you how to think. Go know a lot of things. Yeah. Listen not to me, but to the Logos. It is wise to agree that all things are one. Okay, yeah. Hard to get this one here. It could be possible that he gave a previous argument, and then this is the fragment after. And what he's saying is, don't just listen to me, but actually think about the argument that I just presented to you, and see for yourself this conclusion.
Right.
I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Next one. Therefore it is necessary to follow the common, but although the Logos is common, the many live as though they had a private understanding. So that one, that's again thinking about the Logos as this kind of this common sense. Everyone has this basic common sense, but you think those precious little personal conclusions that you came to are so great, and so you go by your own private little understanding and ignoring the common sense of the masses that everyone has. It's obvious to everyone around you that it's stupid for you to date that girl in high school, but you got this insight as to why it's so special and why you guys are the exception, and, right? That kind of thing. Again, my own personal take. All right. Now, coming up on a point. So some claim that Heraclitus is an empiricist. Maybe really quick, throw these two words out there. Two ways often of categorizing a philosopher is he's either an empiricist or a rationalist. An empiricist is someone who thinks that knowledge ultimately derives from the senses. Rationalist is someone who thinks that knowledge ultimately derives from your reasoning about things. And we'll see how those two come to conflict with each other. So some people are going to say that he's an empiricist, though the Logos is still necessary to comprehend nature. So you need to experience nature with your five senses, and then apply the Logos to the information you get through your five senses to learn, understand. Others are going to claim that no, this is not the case. Others claim that he thought that the senses could deceive us. So rationalists are often going to say, no, you can't just rely on the senses like that. Senses are deceptive. You need to rely on your reason. And to the extent that your senses disagree with your reason, fall back on your reason. Don't pay attention to what your senses say. So we're going to see that he's argued on both sides here. We'll start with people trying to support that he's an empiricist. So one, he says, nature loves to hide, but also the things of which there can be sight, hearing, learning, these are what I especially prize. So it seems like he's saying those things which we can go and experience with our senses are the things that he especially prizes, and that nature loves to hide. And so this is the way that you go and learn about nature and experience nature, putting those two close together, which I think they were supposed to be close together based off of how people are guessing the fragments go together. And next one, eyes and ears are bad witnesses to men having barbarian souls. So this is kind of saying, we'll get to that piece for a second, but you need the eyes and the ears is the piece that we're picking out of this. You need the eyes and the ears to have an understanding. And now, they're bad witnesses to men having barbarian souls. You need to know a little bit about this word barbarian. Anyone know where barbarian comes from? What is it?
The northern tribes in England and Ireland and so on.
Why do they call them barbarians? Oh, okay. No, well, now we use it a certain way. So a barbarian to the Greeks was anyone who didn't speak Greek. And when they would talk, it sounded like they were saying bar, 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 bar. So we call them barbarians. Now, I don't know the actual sound that they make, because obviously that's the English translation of what they're saying. But so that's what a barbarian is, someone who doesn't speak the Greek language. Now, if we think about the Logos as also being a word of some sort, then a barbarian is someone who doesn't understand the language. So someone who doesn't have the Logos, the eyes and the ears, bad witness for him. I don't know. Guess. Your guess is as good as mine. So that was it with Logos. Moving on to his theology. Unless there was anything you wanted to bring up, point out, say. Good. All right. Okay. His theology. He says, God is day and night, winter and summer, war and peace, surfeit and hunger. Surfeit, that's like a glut, an excess, a ton of something. But he takes various shapes, just as fire, when it is mingled with spices, is named according to the savor of each. So, if I was cooking with fire and you walked in, if I happen to be cooking chicken, then you say, oh, chicken. So you would call the fire chicken at one time, but then if I was cooking something else, you name the fire that other thing. So in his mind, fire is responsible for that sense, that smell that you're getting. And so you're actually naming the fire based off of what's cooking. So I'll read that one more time. But he takes various shapes, just as fire, when it is mingled with spices, is named according to the savor of each. Feel like you got that one now?
Yeah.
Okay. Next one. And they pray to these images as if one were to talk with a man's house, knowing not what gods or heroes are. So he's mocking the masses. These people that go and they pray to an idol. He says you may as well go have a conversation with that man's house. It's going to do you about as much good. And then you might feel weird that he said gods or heroes, but remember heroes for the Greeks are often these demigods, like Hercules. The father of Hercules was Zeus. So still kind of talking about gods and demigods. The way of man has no wisdom, but that of God has. Now that one comes close to famous one of Socrates. Famous one of Socrates is something to the effect of man has no wisdom compared to God. Something like that. Compared to God, man's wisdom is worth little. Maybe that's what it comes down. Something like that. Man is called a baby by God, even as a child by a man. So, how a child is compared to you in his wisdom, that is how you are compared to God in his wisdom, as an analogy. To God, all things are fair and good and right, but men hold some things wrong and some right. So if God is somehow, if he has this view of God as being, if he has this view that everything's predetermined, and so everything's happening according to God's will and God's plan, and God's this good thing, everything that happens is ultimately God's plan, and so you might say that was wrong, or that was right, or that was evil, or that was good, but it's all just according to God's plan, so it's all good.
Right.
Something like that. And then, fire in its advance will judge and convict all things. Now, if he thought that fire was the one stuff, then it makes sense that he thought that the universe would ultimately return to fire, or that fire would eventually take over all things. Now, in the Stoic, I'm going to call it theology. In the Stoic theology, remember the Stoics thought that the universe goes through these cycles. The way that the universe ultimately comes to an end is a massive burning. So the universe ends in a mass amount of fire, and that's when it restarts again. So it's possible that, the only reason I'm saying that is it's possible that some of the Stoics' view of theology possibly came from what Heraclitus thought. So even though we don't have all his fragments, the Stoics might have had some that we didn't. Go ahead.
Do they think you could burn things outside of wood?
Sure, you can burn all sorts of things. You
Well,
burn dead bodies all the time.
Oh yeah, you can burn. Could you burn earth?
Could you burn Earth? What's a volcano?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, so, and that's a good segue into fire as a fundamental substance. Now, disclaimer, some people think that he's using fire just in metaphorical language and he didn't literally mean fire is the one stuff. Other people know he's saying fire is the one stuff. So, we'll take the view for a second. We'll put on our glasses saying fire is the one stuff and try and see how best that's argued from his fragments. Or at least his fragments comment on it. Alright, so it seems to claim that fire is a fundamental substance. Some claim he is using fire as a metaphor for logos, as the creator of all things. Others claim he is using fire as a metaphor for change, and that change is the only constant. So this one will make more sense when we've covered the last section. But so either he's literally using fire, or it's a metaphor for one of two things: the logos, or the God of the universe, or the fact that everything is changing like fire is always changing. But if he literally means it, then notice now that we have Thales says one stuff's water, Anaximander says it's apiron, Anaximenes says it's air, Xenophon says it's earth and water, Heraclitus says it's fire, and so we've covered our four main elements with the exception of apiron, which was somehow the four of them combined. Okay, so let's jump into his view as fire is the one stuff. This world, which is the same for all, has not been made by any god or man, but it always has been, is, and will be an ever-living fire, kindling itself by regular measure and going out by regular measures. So somehow the fire, whatever's coming out, is feeding back into the system. The whole system's just feeding itself, and it's an ever-living fire. Now, you can see with that one, it's easy to see how that could be somehow metaphorical, but you can also see how that might be literal. We'll see the next one makes it seem like he meant no in a very literal way. So all things are interchanged for fire, and fire for all things, just like goods for gold and golds for goods. So now this sounds a lot more like he's using fire the way that Anaximander used a Pyrrhon. Somehow fire is the exchanging element. You can take a heap of mass, switch it to fire, and switch it to the next thing. And you can fire can be that intermediate stage that allows you to interchange things for things. The same way that you can use currency to exchange goods for goods. Gold was our fundamental currency at the time, or just some valuable coin there. It didn't necessarily mean to be gold, but for us that would be the same thing as money. Do you like to understand that one? So that one seems a lot more literal, and then this one definitely seems a lot more literal too. The death of fire is the birth of air, and the death of air is the birth of water. That sounds exactly like Anaximenes. Right? You condense fire enough, and you have air. You condense the air even more, and you have water. So that sounds like he's talking about the process for how the things change into each other, and he's using Anaximenes there. For it is death to souls to become water. Remember, Anaximenes thought that the souls were air, so it is death to souls to become water, and death to water to become earth. But water comes from earth, and from water, soul. So that makes it seem like he meant this in a very literal way. Note that since man stays warm, okay, and then here I'm making some more arguments for things that weren't said that could help argue why fire is one stuff. So one thing to know is that since man stays warm, he must have an internal fire. The only things that they know at this time that produces any sort of heat, remember this is pre-electricity, you have the sun, that big ball of fire, and then you have fire around you, and yet you somehow manage to stay warm. It's known to them, the same that's known to you, that bodies stay warm. And notice that combustion seems like it can happen almost anywhere with almost anything. Almost anything can burn. So it seems like there's this capacity for fire within almost anything. How strange is it that at one moment you just have wood and the next there's fire coming out of it? What the? That's crazy. So, maybe not too crazy to say that Heraclitus literally thought that the one stuff was fire. But that's not how some people view it. Okay, is any more about the one stuff being fire before we move on to unity and opposites?
No.
Okay, so unity and opposites. Now, Heraclitus viewed strife as justice. So strife and justice are the same thing. Strife is justice and is keeping opposites in balance, similar to Anaximander. Remember, Anaximander said that the four elements are competing with each other, trying to get the upper hand on each other, and necessity, or justice, is making sure that one doesn't get the upper hand on the other. Heraclitus is going to come along and say it's the fact that they're in constant strife that's stopping one from overtaking the other, and so strife is actually what's maintaining the order here and making sure that things can still exist and the whole universe isn't fire. So strife is a good thing. He's going to praise strife very much. He thinks it's great when men go to war against each other. It's a beautiful thing in his mind. Criticize Homer for having Achilles say, I wish that strife would vanish away from among gods and mortals, which according to Heraclitus would destroy the world. You need strife to keep things in balance. So he's going to think harmony is maintained through strife, basically.
So what's the consequence of too much justice?
No, that's what justice is.
Oh.
Strife and justice are the same thing. It is this internal conflict. This strife is justice. So the way that the Greeks have this view of a cosmic justice is what he's grabbing in on there, and he's saying cosmic justice is strife. That's what puts everything in its place and makes sure that things stay how they ought to stay.
So what's the consequence of not having strife?
The whole universe could be overtaken by fire. And now we live in a universe of pure fire. Okay.
Okay. World peace equals fire.
Okay. So one of his actual quotes now. There would be no harmony without high and low notes, and no animals without male and female, which are opposites. So it's the fact that things meet with their opposites that we're able to produce things that things are able to continue to exist, and that harmonies are produced. Get into some more of these. Now, so strife is just. Heraclitus viewed war in a very positive light, and now we'll read some of these. Huh?
He was pretty dark as far as humans.
Oh yeah, he did not like humans. says every beast is driven to the pasture by blows. Asses prefer straw to gold. So that gives you a sense of what he thinks of you. Those two make sense to you, right?
Yeah.
Beasts don't know what's good for him. And if you came to them with a little bit of straw and a little bit of gold, they'd way rather the straw than the gold. You don't know what's good for you. You don't know what you should want. It takes someone beating you to get you there. We must know that war is common to all and strife is justice, and that all things come into being through strife necessarily. So this might be more falling back on Anaximander, and it's the fact that one thing overtakes another thing, that change is able to occur, and through change you're able to come about. War is the father of all and king of all, and some he shows as gods, others as men, some he makes slaves, others free. So here war is putting all men in their proper place. Some of you were meant to be Achilles, and some of you were meant to be a slave, and war is what ensures you all get to the place that you should be. War putting you back to your natural state. A wonderful thing. And then he says, gods and men honor those who are slain in battle. So you might talk bad about war, but you can't help but praise those who do a good job at war, right? So maybe deep down, you're a little bit of a hypocrite. The people must fight for its laws as for its walls. So I don't know how much between these two, Sparta in particularly would shine in a good light on these two. So gods and men honor those who are slain in battle. Little note for Sparta, because remember, he's a Greek, and so you ask him what's the greatest city-state, he's probably going to say Sparta. In the Battle of Thermopylae, I think it was that one of the Spartans was at that battle, and I guess he got his eyes infected with something to the point where he was blind, couldn't see. He was debating whether or not he should stay and fight the battle. He decided against it, so he had his slave take him back home. When he got back to Sparta, everyone kind of shunned him, saying, oh, there goes the coward, the man who wouldn't stand there and die at his post. But apparently he was able to redeem himself by dying in the Battle of Plataea later. So he was able to be honored by the Spartans in the end. And then the Spartans had a very conservative government, meaning that their government never changed. And so the people must fight for its laws like they fight for its walls. People of Sparta very much believe this. Fight to make sure that the laws that are put in place never change. So I don't know, but those two lines sound very much like Spartan mentality to me. And then here's one where I had to look up an interpretation because I didn't know. Mortals are immortals, and immortals are mortals, the one living the other's death and dying the other's life. I have no clue what to make about that. So, interpreted as men are mortal gods, and gods are immortal men.
What the heck?
I don't. That's the best that we could come up with. That was the best interpretation of that I could find, because I couldn't make heads or tails out of that one.
There's line.
The way up and the way down is one and the same. That one makes perfect sense if you think like a staircase. Going up the staircase and going down the staircase, you go the exact same way. The way up and the way down are the same. Think about something rising or something falling. They take the same course. In writing, the course taken, straight and crooked, is one and the same. I'm guessing that he was after the idea that in the end, wherever your writing was taking you, you get there one way or another. I don't know. But the crooked way and the straight way, one and the same. The one is made up of all things, and all things issue from the one.
Sounds Catholic.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if this is somehow, you might be able to view that as the Logos somehow. Yeah, I don't know. And then God, good and ill are one. This one kind of makes sense when we know his position about the gods, since what we call good and ill are all God's plan, and they're actually the same thing, they're just good. So, we got one more. Unity and opposites. The strife of opposites is really an attunement that produces harmony. So Heraclitus compares the union of opposites to a strung bow or a lyre held in shape by an equilibrium of the string tension. That's right. There is a harmony in the bending back, as in the case of the bow and the lyre. So you've got the bow trying to pull one way, you got the strings on the bow pulling another way, or on the lyre pulling another way. So they're opposed to each other, and yet together they produce a nice little harmony. So the internal conflict somehow produces an overall harmony. And then a hidden harmony is better than an apparent one. The best I can make of that is he's saying that the internal harmony of things is better than music. So I think he's praising how great those internal harmonies are. But again, I don't know. Anything about unity and opposites before we go on to the big one?
He has a point.
Maybe he has a point. Don't confuse the fact that you're just listening to me trying to make sense of this, so it's all going through the Donnie filter.
Yeah, but
And so maybe you and I have a similar filter, and so I'm telling you exactly how you would have ended up interpreting it. And so it's kind of like you're standing in an echo chamber.
it's like checks and balances, kind of how it goes.
It's hard not to read in other opinions, because you probably already know that some of the times. Like I say, Anaximander says this, and you say, wow, he sounds very scientific. Then you read one of his quotes, and you're like, what? That's just poetry. How did you get from all this great science to that line? And so,
Anaximander seems to make a lot more sense.
oh, yes, Anaximander and Anaximenes, the Milesians are definitely
More academic.
more scientific than Heraclitus. But Heraclitus is far more influential in the field of philosophy than any of the others. Him and Parmenides are the big two in philosophy.
Why?
You'll see why. When we get to Parmenides, it will be very clear to you why.
What I'm saying is, why is this guy? Why is Heraclitus?
Because, ask me that after we cover this one.
Okay.
Because this is his big one. This is where the major Heraclitus stuff happens. Now, I'm going to give you a lot of stuff in here that aren't his actual quotes, because what exactly he was saying isn't near as crucial as how later people interpreted what he was saying and how they used them later. So that's what we're going to focus on here, because this is his major influence in philosophy. And basically, it's going to be, Heraclitus is giving you arguments against logic. That's how we're going to sum it up. So, and it's in the everything is becoming. So, nothing ever is, everything is becoming is the shortest way that you can phrase what Heraclitus is going to be saying in this. Nothing ever is, everything is becoming. So, remind ourselves really quick of two rules of logic, and we'll see how Heraclitus seems to be making an attack on these two things. So the law of identity. Each thing is identical with itself. It's typically summarized as little a equals little a, or when you say it in a sentence, you say A is A. It's very common that chances are you've heard people say that A is A. You just probably didn't really pay any attention to it, and now that I've told you, you'll probably notice it more. Second one, law of contradiction. Contradictory propositions cannot both be true in the same sense at the same time, e.g., the two propositions P is the case and P is not the case are mutually exclusive. You cannot have both of those be true. And so, we didn't talk about tautology when we talked about logic. Anyone not know what a tautology is? It's a statement that is always true. So if you call P true, this whole statement is true. If you call P false, this whole statement is true.
Right.
So let's look at it real quick. True and false is true and false is false, not false is true. Okay, let's try it the other way. Let's plug in false. False and true is
False.
not false is
True.
So no matter what you plug in for P, that statement's always true. So this tautology is how we quickly summarize the law of contradiction. Not P and not P is always true. You cannot have both P and not P. Law of contradiction. Basic rule of logic. Any question about that one? Those two rules? Okay, then we'll see how Heraclitus goes about attacking it. Now this is me breaking down the typical argument. You'll notice we still don't have any of Heraclitus yet, but this is typically how the argument goes and why it's such a problem for philosophy later. So claim, change is an obvious fact of reality. Look around you, things change. So that's our basic claim. Things change. Change is a basic fact of reality. Now, wherever there is change, at the end of the change we still have the same thing we started with. Otherwise we wouldn't call it change, but substitution. Right?
I don't get that.
Change means you have the same thing at the end of the change that you started with. So let's look at two scenarios. Let's say I've got a caterpillar and I call it Tim, right? And I watch Tim for a long time and he slowly transforms into a butterfly. It's still Tim. I still have Tim. I still have the same thing.
Okay.
Right? I didn't take Tim and say, Jake, now watch, I'm going to turn him into a butterfly, throw the caterpillar, grab the butterfly. Say, it's magic. No, that's substitution. So we're talking about change, not substitution. So let's read that one more time. Wherever there is a change, at the end of the change, we still have the same thing we started with. Otherwise, we wouldn't call it change, but substitution. Everyone understand that? It's crucial that you follow this argument. This is huge for the rest of philosophy. So nitpick to your heart's content to make sure everything makes sense. So we're good up to this line?
Yeah.
So next line. But wherever there is change, at the end of the change, we have something different than what we started with. Otherwise, we wouldn't call it change.
Right, that's-
If I had the exact same thing I started with, what changed?
That's what my biggest thing was with that first one.
Okay. So yeah, if there's change, then we don't have the same thing that we started with. Therefore, at the end of the change, we have the same and not the same thing. Change then implies a contradiction. At the end of the change, we both have and do not have the caterpillar.
Right.
Right? And we also have what we didn't have before, namely a butterfly. So therefore, at the end of the change, we have the same and not the same thing. Change then implies a contradiction. Therefore, since change is an obvious fact of reality, therefore reality is replete with contradictions, filled with things which both are and are not. Anytime you have change, you have contradiction. Therefore, the law of contradiction and the law of identity are false. A thing is what it is not is a blatant contradiction of a thing is what it is.
Right.
Does he propose any argument to reconcile that?
No. Now, note, Heraclitus does not give this argument. The rules of logic are not explicitly stated until Aristotle. It is just that Heraclitus is used by later philosophers to make this exact argument. So it's implicit in who are we talking about? I just lost his name. Heraclitus, thank you. It's implicit in Heraclitus. It's not explicit. And people use him to then make this argument. But this is the argument that comes from Heraclitus, and Parmenides, when he comes along, is very much attacking this exact argument. This is what he's opposed to. So this is what he's responding to. You're doing Zeno. Hopefully you see now what Zeno is attacking. This exact idea. Okay, so a historian that I found who gave a quick summarization of Heraclitus' position. Reality's essential nature lies in being both the same as itself and different from itself. For in order to change, a thing must become different from itself. If it remains the same as itself, it hasn't changed. But after it has changed, it must still be the same thing. Otherwise, there has been no change, but simply the substitution of one object for another. A changing thing, then, is an identity of opposites. It both is and is not what it was and what it will be. Right? I had the caterpillar change into the butterfly. So at the end, it both is and is not what it was and will be. Follow that? Now, if you think, okay, this is cute for antiquity, but in modern times, obviously no one's going to buy into this nonsense. F.C.S. Schiller, he held a high position in California University. Those are 80 years, meaning he lived within 100 years of right now. An exact statement from him. The law of contradiction is afflicted with falsity. It says nothing can both be and not be, but anything that can change defies it. It can both be and not be with the utmost ease. So people are very much going to use this Heraclitean argument against logic. And believe it or not, this is why a lot of people lose respect for philosophers after a certain point. It's this kind of nonsense that they argue. And they really argue this stuff. And they try to argue against basic logic. It actually happens.
How?
Trying to wrap your head around nonsense is like asking the question, how come Expelliarmus makes his wand go away?
It just does.
Yeah, magic. This is the best explanation. That's how. How do they think that? Magic. Okay. So, the essence of reality is change or becoming. I'm going to use those simultaneously. I'm trying to get you comfortable with this becoming word because it's the word that Parmenides is going to use. So change and becoming are the same thing. If something's changing, it's going from A to B, it's becoming B. That's another way that we can phrase that, changing. Now, getting to actual Heraclitus statements. You cannot step twice into the same river, for fresh waters are continually flowing on. Now he's using, they're guessing, river as a metaphor for anything now. You can never step into the same river twice, for fresh waters are continually flowing on. So you step in the river once, and then go to step in again. No, the river's changed. It's not the same river. right? New waters are there, the banks erode a little bit, however you define the river, it's definitely changed by the time some waters flood. And then, we both step and do not step into the same rivers, we are and are not. So he's going to argue, not only can you not step into the same river twice because the river changes, also you change. So the Donnie that stepped the first time can't be the Donnie that stepped the second time, because Donnie changed. So I go step into the Nile once, and then Donnie too steps into the Nile the second time. So I both step and did not step into the same river.
You are and are not.
I am and am not. Yeah. Okay. So he thought that everything is changing in every respect at every instant of time. Everything is continually always changing in every respect, always. Not some little things are changing, everything is changing. Which is why some people say he's using fire as a metaphor for change. And I can probably see what he meant by that.
A lot better when
Yeah. So, well, we'll just continue. We'll make those points later. Nothing persists for 2 consecutive instances, or, in other words, there are no entities. Now, this is something that I put on this slide because we're going to see some explanation for it coming up, but here's leading up to it. So, we're going to see with this in the next slide how people come to the conclusion, using Heraclitus, that there's no such thing as entities in the world around us. There is no such thing as you. Nothing ever is, everything is becoming is the way he's often phrased up. Everything flows and nothing abides is another way that he's often phrased up. So let's get into what this historian said now. This is him giving later people's opinions on what Heraclitus was saying. No man can ever step into the same river. How can he? The second time he tries to step, new waters would have flown down from upstream. The water would not be the same. Neither would the bed and the banks be the same. For the constant erosion would have changed them too. And if the river is the water and the beds and the banks, the river is not the same river. Follow that so far?
Yeah.
Strictly speaking, that's supposed to be there. Strictly speaking, there is no river. Worse yet, you cannot step into the same river twice because you are not there twice. You too change. And the person who stepped the first time does not exist to step the second time. Persons do not exist.
So how does that constant change imply that they don't exist?
We'll get to that right here. If you're still confused after I give the modeling clay example, let me know. So, when anyone says that something exists, the meaning is that something does not change, at least for a short time. An object that is real must be an object that stands still.
Why?
Now, modeling clay, and then tell me if you're still confused. So, here's the example. Imagine that you saw someone with some modeling clay, and they're just an insanely quick worker, and so they're constantly changing it all the time. It looks like it's the Empire State Building, but just as it looks like it's the Empire State Building, next thing it looks like it's a laptop, and just as it looks like a laptop, next it looks like a teddy bear, and just as it looks like it's a teddy bear, it looks like it's the Titanic. And so it's constantly changing all these different shapes all the time. Right?
Okay.
The only thing that you can say, what is it, is modeling clay. Now get rid of the modeling clay. What is it? Something that's in constant change all the time. You can't call it an entity.
Kind of, but that's not how it actually works.
This is how Heraclitus is saying things are. Everything is changing in every respect at every instant of time.
So it doesn't exist.
So entities don't exist.
So
Change
nothing-
exists.
How can you say they exist if you can't say it's the same thing in one instant and say it's the same thing in another?
Yeah, how can you put a name? Well, let's come down to this one. Oh, I don't capture it here. Let's continue for a little bit and then come back to this. This is why Heraclitus is sometimes said to have a process philosophy as opposed to being a material monist. So some people say he's a material monist and he thought that the one stuff was fire. Other people say no, he's actually a process philosopher. He's not saying that there is one physical entity that makes up everything. He's saying that the process of change is what makes up everything. The only thing that's constant in the whole universe is change. The fact that everything is changing. That's the only constant. To help give intuition for where this leads, sometimes it's hard to know exactly what Heraclitus is saying, but we can look at least some of his students that come away from his works. So Cratylus was a disciple of Heraclitus, and since he took Heraclitus very seriously, he stopped talking on principle. Why? Because words have no meaning. the only way to give words meaning is via a referent. I can't talk about desk unless there's some desk in reality to point at. I can't talk about James unless I can point at James and say there's James. Words have to refer to something. There has to be some referent, something for the words to refer to. But since there are no entities, there's nothing for the words to refer to, speech is meaningless. So he stopped talking. Now, I'm not sure how he stayed alive, but apparently he wagged his finger as a base form of communication for whenever he was hungry. So I don't know if he was wealthy and like had slaves who took care of him. He must have told them beforehand, hey, when I wag my finger, you better come with food.
So when he says stop talking on principle, what does that exactly mean?
He stopped talking.
Oh.
He was a follower of Heraclitus,
Oh.
believed exactly what he was saying,
Okay.
took him very seriously, and stopped talking.
That's beautiful.
Okay, that made no sense.
He believed exactly what Heraclitus was saying, which means words mean nothing, so he stopped talking.
Okay,
I know, he believed the words of Heraclitus, but...
whatever, I guess.
That's someone who
But
really
contradictions
believes
don't
religion.
matter anyway, so hey.
Okay, so this is why some philosophers argue him as regarding the senses as invalid. So remember, some people argue his fragments means that he's an empiricist and all knowledge is ultimately based in the senses. Others say, no, 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 he's saying that the senses are completely invalid. You cannot call him an empiricist. He is firmly on the side of the rationalists. Our senses seem to perceive permanent and unchanging things, but we know that everything is changing, hence our senses are deceptive. Why do things appear to be unchanging? Perception of unchanging things is maintained by change.
Yeah.
So the fact that they're changing is what makes it seem like they're not changing. And the example is a river is maintained by the fact that it continues to flow. If you stop the river from flowing, pretty soon you have no river, right?
So what happens when it freezes over?
Well, they're saying things that look like they're permanent. That's just to your crude senses. And they're actually changing, and it's the fact that that continuous changing is going on is what's causing it to continue to look permanent. A common example that's given is, imagine a bath of water where I have a pipe pumping in water at end end and it's draining at the other end. And so water is entering just as fast as it's leaving. If you just look at it, you might conclude, if you don't pay too close of attention, it's not changing. But they say, no, everything's like that. Even when it doesn't look like it's changing, it's the fact that it's continually changing that gives you that perception that it's not changing. Did you have a question?
So it would be like if all atoms stopped moving, then it would not be the case.
If you're going to bring a modern view to this, you can't just say the atoms stop moving. You gotta say, we gotta talk about the photons, the neutrons. We gotta talk about everything.
If everything's not moving, then it would be happening. Right.
If you get rid of all change, then you have nothing.
That's just what it's
No, you're trying to take the inverse of what he's saying. He's saying that things that aren't changing, things that look like they aren't changing, are being preserved by change.
Right.
So anything that looks like it persists is persisting due to change. He's not saying if something persists, then it ceases to. He's not saying if you get rid of change, it ceases to exist. He's saying something that looks like it continually exists is due to change.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like
Okay.
something that looks solid is because the atoms are continuously changing. There.
Yes, whatever looks solid, the metaphor he gives is a river. A river is maintained by the fact it continues to flow. So continually changing, but it looks like it lasts from one moment to the next. And so since everything is changing in every respect at every time, there are no absolutes, everything is relative. The world is often, this worldview is often referred to as a Heraclitian flux. The world is in a Heraclitian flux, common little quote. And what do they mean by that? They mean everything is constantly changing. Since Heraclitus appears to be following reason as opposed to his senses, he is also sometimes called a rationalist as opposed to an empiricist. Other people don't like putting him as a rationalist because he's going right against logic, so does that really make him a rationalist? And it's one that people argue to put him however you want, either side of the spectrum. But this argument that change implies a contradiction is the big thing in Heraclitus. So do we have any more questions about Heraclitus before we move on to Peter? Jeremy, you want to get the lights? Now we're done with the slides.
Literally, my paper is like, look at the sentence and see what we can get. It's like, this guy's crazy.
It makes no sense. Makes no sense.
Yeah.
I don't know how you function as a human being.
Make sure you don't trip on the cords. Come up in front of the camera.
Yeah.
We need to turn off the projector.
I mean, that's still a form of communication. I don't see how it's any better.
Hey,
So we can
it's still going though. All right, Peter, you got 10 minutes. Or 10% of my battery, I mean.
Heraclitus of, how do you say it?
Ephesus.
Ephesus developed his philosophies unlike the others before him in Miletus. Although he supported some and few ideas, he stuck to himself and created interpretations based on his self-governance. In reading and learning about Heraclitus, I have found that his philosophy sums to three main points he hits on. That is his theory of flux, that everything flows in and out of each other, his theory that everything is made up of fire, and then the opposites are really one and the same. All these theories, in the way that I see it, build upon one another. Heraclitus seems to not like humankind and thinks that only a select few who are out to seek wisdom will come to an understanding of his few works or fragments. For although all things happen according to this logos, men are like people of no experience, even when they experience such words or deeds, as I explain, when I distinguish each thing according to its constitution and declare how it is. But the rest of men fail to notice what they do after they wake up, just as they forget what they do when asleep. Fragment 1. Why do I agree with Heraclitus' philosophy, or disagree? So basically in this paper it's like, can you silence that for me? I basically take this theory, divide it into three parts, and explain why I would agree or disagree with each part. Not why I would. It's not whether I do actually agree or disagree. Why I would come, and here's my reasoning behind it. According to Heraclitus, everything is flowing, everything is constantly changing. I agree and disagree with him in this theory. In the realistic reality we all have when awake, I have found that life moves forward, with or without you. Things are changing, people change, experiences shape reality, and then it moves forward. I think this ties in with his theory that everything is flowing. Is that not what he is essentially saying, that everything is changing from one thing to another? More educated people than I interpret this theory as that everything is changing, moving from one thing to another, never staying the same. However, I don't agree with this interpretation. I do think that things and people are changing all the time, but God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. I would like to believe that all things flow unto him. We have heard both of these sayings, and they agree with his theory, but not with the interpretation that all things change. I believe that if I want to become like God, then I do need to change. However, I don't think all things change because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and all things flow unto him. This theory can tie into our religion and how we can perceive our world because of it. Heraclitus claims that everything is made up of one thing, namely fire. This is my interpretation of, what he was going at. The other early philosophers also believe this theory that everything is made up of this something. Thales' water, Anaximander, the boundless, Anaximenes, Heraclitus similarly came to this resolution of everything being made up of this something. This theory still stuns everyone today. Science doesn't even know what this something is. However, they have gotten closer to trying to discover what this something really is. I don't completely agree with Heraclitus, and I don't accept it due to the fact that I haven't really thought about it much and I haven't read a lot about other theories. However, I can agree with it to some religious sense. Similarly with the flux theory, that I can see how religion can make sense of it. Our religion believes that the earth will be cleansed by fire, also known as baptism by fire. Why fire though? To go along with Heraclitus, in fire is everything born, and now fire is the death of everything. We believe it was water, not fire, that was the birth, but you can see how I made that connection. It makes sense to think that fire is the start and end of things. We are familiar with opposites and their properties. Boy and girl, light and dark, day and night, up and down, good and bad, chaos and order. According to Heraclitus, they are one and the same. Without one, then there is no other. Boy and girl are both ultimately human. They came the same way and went the same way. light and darkness. Without light, darkness would cease to exist. How can you know what is dark without the light to make the difference? Heraclitus' theory is that they are the same and that they constantly change. This one is hard for me to understand. How can good and evil be the same? However, when I think about it a bit, the devil was once like Jesus. Although they are polar opposites, they weren't always that way. In learning about Heraclitus and his philosophy, some of our beliefs that I have created an understanding of correlate a little bit with his philosophy. Although humans can live completely different lives in completely different times in history, it was a little eye-opening to think that Heraclitus was onto something that can be related to my set of beliefs. It's intriguing to know that the way I view my life might not be drastically different from that of another.
Wonderful. Any questions or comments? Yeah. What? Ask him, that's okay. You don't understand. Oh, the comment is just you don't understand? Well, ask him for a copy of the paper. You can read and reread until you feel you have an understanding.
I don't think
It only makes sense that if you're writing a paper on Heraclitus, it's hard to understand the paper. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay, let's do this at the end of class rather than at the start of class next time. Do we have any feedback for the class overall? Things that you thought went well, things you didn't like? What do we think about the lights, first of all? Good, bad?
They were good for the first part, but then in the end, I think it just
It got a
hurt
little bit
more
too
than
bright
helped.
when it got dark outside.
This got too bright?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe have a trigger point. Let's just say if it feels like it's starting to get too dark, first person that you feel like that's the case, just say something and we'll turn on the back bank of lights and we'll just go from there. Anything else?
I like that you did your lecture than you did the paper.
Yeah.
You think that works better?
It will help just follow his papers.
Yeah, if you didn't have known what I was talking
You would
about.
have been completely
Oh,
lost.
it-
Yeah, for yours it makes a lot of sense. Yep, so maybe we can continue with that.
Well, for mine, I think it'd be easier for you to do the paper first.
Okay, yeah, so we'll just do it on a case-by-case basis.
And I don't want to be sick if he's sick.
Right, yeah, I'll just cover what you don't cover. That'll be easier.
It's kind of, this is, I mean, I don't know how you're gonna get around this, but it's kind of hard to think back on it and remember what philosophies belonged to who, and their distinguishments in order of time.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'll try to do a quick recap at the start of each lecture.
Because it's like, I know, so there's these 4 philosophers, and one of them believed this, one of them believed this, one of them believed this.
But
I
some
can't
are
remember
a lot
which
more
was which, and what
influential.
was there.
Yeah, so at the start of each lecture, I'll insert a recap slide, like I did today,
Yeah.
to try and really quick and give you a chance to ask any questions.
You might want to do like a recap at the end too.
Okay, we can do a quick recap real quick. So Thales, the all is water. Anaximander, the all is apeiron, or the indefinite. Anaximenes, the all is air. And Anaximenes is one that gave the view about how things change from things into things.
So Anaximenes and Heraclitus were the 2 that are kind of.
Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes are all pretty close together in their views. Just changing what they view the one stuff of as, and then their views about how the world actually operates kind of evolves with time.
And they're all
Coming up with Anaximenes' view of rarefication and
Yes.
condensation.
That made, he made the most sense to me.
Thales was a disc on water.
Thales thought that the Earth floated on water.
Yeah.
And so earthquakes were due to the Earth rocking.
But he thought it was
That's
flat.
genius.
I don't know.
He thought it was flooded. It was just.
All we know is it was floating on water.
Dude, that is literally pretty smart. That's not a bad one. All land is floating on water.
Okay, let me continue with the recap before we die. Xenophon, he was the one that most of what he said was targeted at religion. So he's getting after Homer and Hesiod for anthropomorphizing the gods.
Right.
And he's the one that starts using this weird language of God is somehow everything, and everything is unity, the all is one, and one is everything. This is kind of weird language that is going to make more sense with Parmenides. So he's a precursor for the Eleatic philosophers, which is why I made the point, and he spent some time in Elia, and I drew that point on the map and wrote the name in there. And then the last one was Heraclitus. Nothing ever is, everything is becoming. Everything is flowing, everything is in a constant state of change.
Nothing exists
Heraclitus, yeah, flux. Change implies a contradiction, Heraclitus. Change is right, change implies a contradiction, therefore there's contradictions. That's how later people see him, but Heraclitus. So, and you can see how that's going to be a big problem for upcoming philosophy.
Yeah.
So that's what we've covered so far. I'll also answer the recap slide next time, and you'll always be free to ask whatever questions you had, any reminders you want, stuff like that. I forgot my charger for the phone this time, so that's why I'm kind of rushing a little. Anything else?
I think we're good.
Think we're good? Okay, everyone who wants to get credit, come meet with me, and the rest of you can stay or go as you please. I don't care.